start, so we are sitting here with Debra Kamps. Could you tell us how you originally came to Juniper Garden?
I came here when I was in graduate school, so I'd been accepted into the doctoral program in special education with Rich Simpson as my advisor, and so I needed to work, and I heard about Juniper Gardens. I thought, this is going to be a perfect fit, so I'm going to have really good coursework, and then I'm going to have some really good experiences in an urban community. So I thought that's a good place. So I interviewed with Charlie and Joe Del Quadri, and they hired me. So I was lucky.
Mm-hmm. What was the environment like, both at Juniper Gardens and then the community? So what were your impressions of Kansas City, Kansas, and then of Juniper Garden?
Yeah. The community, one thing, I mean, I grew up in Kansas City, so it's my hometown, but I was still very struck by the poverty. And I came here to Juniper Gardens when we were in the Juniper Gardens housing project. So we were in the basements. So we were in the basement of the liquor store, the basement of the community center, which is where I was, and the basement of one of the churches. So that community was it was run down, it was poor, there was a lot of crime, so it was kind of a tough place to be. But I felt like it was a good place to be, and after being there for a while, I felt like I really belonged there, and that Juniper Gardens really belonged there, that KU really needed to be in this community, and we could learn a lot from the people, the children and the families there, and we could help them. So it was a good thing. I think I've seen some really nice changes in that 40 years, and with the downtown revitalization, I think they've done a really nice job with that. There's new buildings. There have been new neighborhoods, Turtle Hill, new townhomes around this community, and so it's more vibrant than it was at that time. And then certainly with some of the development in western Wyandotte County, that's all been good for this county and for the United government. And so those have been nice changes that I've seen. It's nice to be in this building. It's nice to be part of this community. But I mean, there's still many very, very poor neighborhoods, not only in this community, but on the Missouri side as well. So that's still a huge issue, I think.
And what year did you come here?
1979, I think.
And then can you describe a little bit what the work environment was like?
It was professionally, it was a very supportive work environment. It was pretty small at that time. I don't know how many people were actually employed, but there were a number of graduate students. It was really strong, supportive community. The graduate students worked well together. We were establishing relationships in the schools, and so even though it was in this kind of hardcore urban neighborhood, the work environment was good. It was strong, it was pleasant, good colleagues, and good people in the schools. So I enjoyed it.
And what was some of your early work? So what was your sort of introduction to working here?
Well, my early work was in the area of autism. So what brought me to that point is that as an undergraduate at the University of Missouri, Kansas City at UMKC, I spent some time volunteering in their campus school. And so there were children of faculty, but also people from the community. And it was really progressive at that time because it was set up to be an inclusive model. And believe me, in the 70s, there were not very many inclusive models in place. And so their ratio was one child with disabilities for every 3 or 4 children who were typically developing. So that was great. And so I met the first children that I'd ever met who had autism, and I was just fascinated. Really challenging and unique kinds of behaviors, and I was just enthralled. I just really knew that I wanted to work with those children. And then upon graduation and getting my master's degree from KU, then I taught children with autism for 3 years. I never worked so hard in my life. life. It was great to have children who were running around the classroom and throwing their clothes out the bus windows, and then seeing these children be able to settle down, setting up token systems for them, helping them communicate in different ways. So it was just really great to be able to see the progress that we could make for those children. So, it went from those early interests, and then when I was at Juniper Gardens, the business of Juniper Gardens was research, and so our first grant was to move beyond that kind of one-on-one model to a model where we could provide effective one-on-one instruction, but also in our classrooms teach them in small groups, implement peer networks. So that was a good model. We were able to do then longitudinal studies and following children with autism over a 5-year period of time. It just really hadn't been done. And so for those children, being able to set up 2, 3, 4 peer networks every year of that 5-year period of time was really rewarding. And the school districts, we were in 5 different school districts, they were very, they also were, really energized by that, and to see how well those children could do with peers. But, eventually that work led to our randomized trial that we did. Kathy Burke here, and Linda Heisman Powell, and then at UW, Eileen Schwartz. So it's kind of to me, it's part of the Juniper Gardens model. You start with an effective intervention, and you build it, and you build it, and you do the foundational research, and then you expand it to larger studies. So it was great. And 10 years later, I used that same model for children with behavior disorders. So we started with one project and homeschool kinds of interventions and peer tutoring, and then moved that onto our Center for Reading and Behavior grant. So that was a huge, one of the first center grants. So that was a $6 million project, and 7 other centers around the country. So it was an important time, I think, for Juniper. Other investigators were also starting to submit and receive funding for those big centers. So it was a nice progression for Juniper.
Do you think that you said something about sort of the Juniper Gardens model, so do you think that it's just like starting small and then just really sticking with it and then expanding that work? Could you talk a little bit more about it?
Well, it does seem to be a model that has worked for us. And I think part of the reason that it works is that there's always been a community of researchers, and people have different interests. So mine was autism and behavior disorders. Other persons were very interested in language development and early childhood settings and those interventions for that population. So it's providing the evidence and starting with an idea and gathering the proof and trying it with different children and in different settings, and just really building on that evidence is, it is a model that I've seen other people here use, and I think it's a really good model. Early on, Charlie also, in some of his assessment and observation work, we did observational studies in classrooms, and then we looked at that data and looked at periods of time and circumstances where we saw the most active engagement by children and the most effective kinds of results, and looked then. So in some of the work, you're actually looking for the effective interventions as opposed to having developed your own. So either model, you do the single subject design studies, then you do the larger studies, and then recruit collaborators from around the country.
What were, backing up a little bit, I guess, excuse me, what were some of your early challenges that you faced during this one?
I think learning how to write grants was a challenge. We did have good mentors. Charlie was so good as a grant writer, and
still so good.
Still so good. And Judy Carta, Vance, I think, was such a great leader in terms of inspiring people and reinforcing us as colleagues and investigators. And I think bringing Charlie here and Joe Del Quadri, I think he was adding to this pool of people who were grantsmen and people who really knew how to learn some of the politics of Washington and learn how to fund the research. So money is always an issue. My very first grant, the funding for it and several other grants at that time were delayed for a year because of the government freeze of monies. So
is that in 82 or 83?
3, I think. Yeah. So money was, a challenge, but certainly not one that we weren't able to overcome those kinds of challenges. And just accessing children and accessing schools. The Kansas City, Kansas district has been a really welcoming community, but we needed more. And so that is a lot of time that we don't think about when we think about the research. We think about the studies, the design, the data, the observations, but thinking about the relationships and establishing those relationships is a big part of it. So that was challenging.
Mm-hmm. You wouldn't know anything about that, would you? It's a big part of the Circle and Literacy 3D projects is maintaining these relationships. And we have across school districts, including KCK and many that you've worked with. It's
right.
Yeah, it's definitely not. I don't remember taking a course on it in graduate school, but
right.
It is such a.
Right.
It's a pretty big. It can be a big challenge to do it and get folks on board and keep them on board.
Yes. And reinforcing your research participants is important. I mean, it's a principle we know as researchers with children and learning, but it's also important for all of us as adults too.
Right.
So it played a part in the people who we hired to work for us. I think it's like hiring people who we felt confident sending into schools to be our representatives with teachers and principals. That's an important skill, and so sometimes we're teaching our graduate students that, but it's an important skill to look for.
Is that, I'm trying to think of the best way to sort of phrase this question, but so there's clearly, a lot to learn in the research field, but then there's a lot to learn about how to do research effectively. And then there are things that you learn in the course of your research that, I don't know, I think it's just all this sort of interconnected process.
Right.
How do you think, so kind of early on, how do you think that this is a more specific question, I guess, but the transition between Vance and Charlie, what sort of leadership do you think that Vance left that's been sort of a permanent mark on Juniper Gardens? And then how about Charlie as well?
I think that, as I mentioned, Vance had a real knack for recruiting good people, and his graduate students would come from all over the country, and he understood the importance of those relationships and with other institutions, and he did a very nice job of that, and he was a very reinforcing person to work for. And I think Vance set up the business of being in the schools and reinforcing teachers, and he laid the foundation for that. And I think Charlie was also very good at that. But I sense that Charlie's scope, his idea of the scope of where the research could go in the schools was unique, and it was a nice addition to the foundation that Vance had laid for us. So that time, Charlie had big visions. We were going to do eco-behavioral assessment studies in, 20 schools and 5 districts, and we were going to establish assessment tools that people could use anywhere. And so he had that vision of expanding the work and developing some of those tools for us. So I think that was very helpful. And Joe Del Quadri and Charlie Greenwood, and then Judy, they very much were about being in the field and the business of applied research in And so the applied nature of our research has always been a true strength of Juniper Gardens, I think. And the valuable experiences for the graduate students. Many, many, many graduate students have come back to us and said, we learned just as much working at Juniper Gardens as we did in any of our classes because of being in the field and getting those kinds of experiences. It was true for me, you know, and it continues, I think, down in these generations. So.
Yeah, I think just as an observer, it sure seems like. Excuse me, this is related to that last question, but can you take us through what you view as some of the pivotal moments in Juniper's history when you were here?
All right. Well, you know, I've thought about this, and I think that I link kind of pivotal moments to discoveries. And so that's one way that I think about that. So, you know, I think of the early time period where Betty Hart and Todd Risley were doing some of the collection of the data on the language and their findings, the differences for children who were in poor communities and families to those who were in more privileged homes, and just the sheer volume of language and vocabulary that parents talking to their children, the sheer amount, and what a big difference that made in terms of the children's development. I mean, so that was kind of one of those pivotal discoveries. I mean, think about, you know, people in the White House are, you know, citing those studies in their papers as a foundation for research. And Charlie, his eco-behavioral assessment and his work with researchers at Ohio State and the opportunity to respond principle, and just learning and knowing that active engagement of the students is so critical to their learning. And again, with this eco-behavioral assessment, just the value of knowing it's not just about the student's behavior, it's that interaction of the student's behavior and the teacher's behavior and the peers and all those environmental variables that come into play, the materials and access to instruction. And I mean, those were big discoveries and are really in part of all curriculum, and, you know, for teachers. And that was a big, I think, those pivotal kinds of principles. And I think there was a change too at the point in time where we began changing the way we would do grants. So one thing that changed is that we started submitting a lot more. Just the number of grants that we were submitting began to increase. And then the switch from grants that we would do here in a few schools to those bigger center grants where we could really tackle bigger questions and recruiting colleagues from around the country. I mean, that seemed to be kind of a period of time where things were beginning to change. And some of that was with the establishment of the Institute for Education Sciences. Some was just, you know, maybe just our involvement too. I mean, certainly the move here to the children's campus was a pivotal time for us. And that whole 10-year period of time, and Martha Staker and the board and Charlie and the Dunn family and our community, I mean, truly, that was a 10-year dream come true. And it's a game changer, I think, to be in a setting now where we have children and service providers in our building. It's kind of like the Juniper Gardens community is bigger, better. I love it. I love coming to work and seeing all those little babies down there. And just being able to recruit them for some of the projects and being able to help train for their interventions. It's been huge, I think. So those are some of the kind of big things that I think about.
I think that's it, because I know we've talked with folks about, you know, the move to this building, but I wasn't aware that it was a 10-year process.
It was huge, yeah. And then, you know, every time that Martha comes in, I kind of think about all the work that she did to make this happen.
Yes.
And all the people that were involved in bringing it together. I'll show you pictures sometime of like all the progress and stuff too. And it was ambitious to say the least. And when I think about you guys working on that while you were doing your research, it's pretty crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's huge and really important. really important, and it's just such a nice place for Juniper to be, I think.
And what's been really good to see too is that collaboration between researchers here and at Project Eagle
Mm-hmm.
and at the Family Conservancy has grown.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, especially lately when we have a lot of stuff going on downstairs,
Yes.
and it's just so helpful to see that that's still, you know, that relationship is being maintained, and like the whole purpose of moving into this building has been
Gratifying.
the goal has been fulfilled.
It's come true. That's right. It's been fulfilled. And I think, you know, Dean Olson, I mean, think about the Talk Replay initiative. I mean, where that stemmed from, the early research, and Dean Olson and Dale Walker, and I mean, they really pushed that forward. I can't tell you how excited I was the first time I saw a city truck, like one of the city water trucks, and there's the Talk Replay bumper sticker. It's like, yes, there we go. There it is. And the billboards around the city, have you ever seen the Talk Replay billboards around the town? Awesome. Just so incredible. It's
It
just
is
like
very cool.
very, very cool. So, I mean, that how they've all the three tenants have really, the partners have really embraced that notion of the research and the partnerships. It's great.
And I think that kind of touches on this next question, but how do you think Juniper Gardens as an organization has evolved over time?
Well, I think that it's evolved just in terms of the partnerships that we've developed. That's definitely been a great progression. I think the partnerships, the number of people that are part of our organization, just, I mean, it's grown and it continues to grow, and that's important. And the seeing it progress from leadership, Vance Hall, Charlie Greenwood, now Brian Boyd, I mean, people come here and they lead this organization and everyone makes it better and better, and it's only going to continue to be the same. So, and I do see more efforts also to link us more to the university. I mean, we are KU, we are part of KU, but we're, you know, an hour down the road, so it's kind of a different, I've seen more work towards collaboration with people. It's always been there, but I think people are doing more to do research together, and that's a good step.
Yeah. Do you think the mission has changed at all since you started as to where we're at today?
Fundamentally, no.
Yeah.
I mean, it still seems to me that our mission has always been to help children thrive and learn socially and academically, and to help the support systems, the families, the schools, the teachers, and how to make that happen. I mean, that seems to me it's always been the basic mission of Juniper Gardens. So I don't think it's really changed.
Yeah.
So the people who've come and the people who've stayed have maintained that, and I think people appreciate that when they come here. So
Yeah, I think it attracts folks. It attracted me
good.
across the country.
Great.
One important thing that I just realized that we absolutely need to talk to you about is K-CART. And can you tell us about how K-CART began and sort of its evolution?
Sure. That was an interesting phenomenon for me. It's just, so the beginnings of K-CART, so this is the Kansas Center for Autism Research and Training, and this was started in 2008. And the background story to that is that people in the community in Kansas City went to Steve Warren, who was the director of the Lifespan Institute, and said that you know, the university needs to be in our community doing more things for our children with autism. You know, you need a presence here, you need to do more about that. And we have needs, and you know, this is a premier university, what are you going to do? So Steve Warren went, he talked to me, and he talked to Matt Reese, who was the psychologist and director of the Center for Child Development at KU Med Center, and he asked us. He invited us to be co-directors of the center. He said, I'm going to start a center, and I would like you to direct the center, and I'm going to find funding. And so he secured a $1 million grant from endowment, and so we use those grant monies to fund pilot grants by people at the university, and those they served as seed projects, if you will, so those led to funding in some novel areas. So that was one aspect. We secured a training grant from the state, Kansas State, and so that training grant enabled Linda Heitzman-Powell and her crew to train hundreds and hundreds of service providers who could provide intervention with families and in schools. And then we did a little bit of fundraising, and one really interesting component to that was that I submitted a project to the Kansas City Young Matrons group in town. So that's a philanthropic group of ladies who've been around for many years, and they do volunteer work, and then they adopt a project every other year for a big fundraiser. They raised $119,000 for Cape Heart. So it's just like $1 million here and this $119,000 from people in the community. So that was really exciting. What was really fun about that project is that we used those monies to fund the Kansas City Autism Connections project. So that's still on the KCART website. But those are 3 short videos, and one is connecting parents, one is connecting kids, and one is connecting teens. And so those videos, we worked with Wide Awake Film Company. So being in the business of making a film, even though it's only 15 minutes, is like, oh my gosh, this is so fascinating. It's so interesting. So we're working with the producer to create the scripts. We're recruiting actors, including some children with autism. We're recruiting the schools, and then to work with that film crew. So we're out in the school and we're filming all day and here, and the props, and it was really fun. It was really fascinating. I think the best part about that is that the quality, by hiring a professional filmmaking crew, the quality was really good. And they're important because they actually demonstrate strategies and interventions that children in schools can use for their classmates who have autism, and parents can use to teach your child how to wear new shoes because it's summertime, and so they don't have to have a tantrum about it, or to eat new foods. And so so it was one way to take the research intervention and put it in a very applied media form for people to look at and use. So that was a real different way to use the research, and it was really fun. So that was just part of KCART and kind of going about the business of starting a center. So.
Oh, that's so cool. And then it kind of did it evolve to incorporate. So when I think of KCART, one of the first people I think of is Sean, Sean Swindler, who connects families with services.
Yes.
Did that become one of the core missions, I guess, of KCART?
Well, it is, but in conjunction with the Med Center, because Sean and then their family liaison person take those kinds of calls, and so they are able to connect people to services. So that's a really important thing. They publish some nice online resources for families who are transitioning their teens into adulthood and those services. So that's really important. Matt Mosconi is the director of KCART now, and so he's continued to secure funding for research in the area of autism. And Sean Swindler was a great asset. So I know he publicly will talk about being the parent of a son with autism. So he has kind of this insider level of information, and people in the community love Sean. And he's a great spokesperson. He's on every committee in the state, in Topeka for moving things forward, advocacy groups, and together, one of the really fun things that we did through KCART is establish an autism support club out at Johnson County Community College, and I still am involved with that. And so that's been really, really rewarding to meet these young adults on the spectrum and to do things with them and give them ideas about how to manage life. And so,
Can you describe a little bit about the types of things that you do with that group?
well, we primarily do field trips into the community. So I think what people who've been members of the club, so I think the club is 8 years now. And so there are still some original members who continue to come to the club. my dear friends, and we continue to have fun together. So we meet regularly, and some of these folks tell their parents that these are the only friends that I have. And so, but we do things together. We plan things that we want to do. So we go out in the community. JCCC has been very supportive. They've taken over more of the managing of it. Now it's the college vans instead of KU vans driving people to these field trips. So it's a chance for them to get together, and I think it's also a chance for them to talk to one another about how do you handle this and what do you do about this, and so it's not really designed as an intervention. I always think of it more as a social club, but it certainly is serving an important function. Need.
When I first came out here, I think you mentioned that I think it was this group that going out and playing laser tag was part of it. So I thought that was so neat.
Laser tag, bowling, every once in a while the movies. They actually love taking the bus over to Lawrence, and going to the Lawrence campus and going to the field house over there. And we go to the mall. And so they're just different opportunities that come up in terms of, using money, you can do this in public, you can't do that in public, and just opportunities come up for some incidental kinds of learning.
Yeah, and safe space to learn these things without fear of judgment or anything else.
Right. So Sean's available, I'm available. Karen Miller, the JCC staff, works in their access office, she's always been available for those folks.
I could talk more about it. I think that's just so cool. Can you describe, and this is somewhat related to, I think we've already touched on some of it, but how your work at Juniper has impacted you professionally and personally?
I think professionally it's been so rewarding to see the accomplishments and to see the interventions in use and just see the data, the science part about it has been really, really exciting to me. And I mean, professionally, it's just like how many people get to say that they have a job that they love and they are able to stay with that job for 40 years. It's just like, it's great. And just to know that, I've helped a lot of teachers, I've helped a lot of children. I mean, it's so very rewarding. And personally, just the friends, even though I don't get to see people at Juniper Gardens very much anymore, just the friends people here, you feel like they're your family and they're your friends. And this organization, I know it is still true, and I hope it never changes, but the people here are such good supporters of each other and such good collaborators. There's so much excitement when people get a grant funded. There's so much excitement when people discover something new, and when they get a publication, people really reinforce each other here. And it's not always like that in university settings. So that's been unique and a great, personally, professionally for me, that's been a really good thing.
Yeah, I think folks here, they build such good teams. Like, when I came here, with Howard and Rose, and it's just such a, getting these folks together that are great, kind people that have, interesting research kind of efforts going forward.
Yes, I mean that's one thing I wanted to be sure and share with people is, one of the fondest memories that I have of Juniper, and it comes back to this kind of idea of building on a platform of research and growing the research, and it's just when Howard Wills came to work for me for Juniper Gardens, it was a game changer for me. I'd had great mentors with Charlie and Judy and Joe and Vance early on, but Howard was a true partner. He was right out there in the trenches with me, And I mean, it was so, it made, I could do everything that I was doing better because of Howard and being kind of that in the trenches kind of partner. And he also was really skilled at hiring people who would be good team members and building those teams. So at one time, right about that time also was the development of, or the expansion of school-wide positive behavior supports. And so those interventions were used, tiered kinds of levels of intervention in the school-wide. I mean, it truly was school-wide, so the interventions. And so that was also happening right around that time. So building that team, at one point in time, we had 10 graduate students working on that project. And we, Howard and our team of graduate students, we set up school-wide positive behavior supports in 8 schools in Kansas City. And that was a big, big effort. And in one of our final years, we had 900 children in those schools who were getting small group reading intervention. And most of those kids had not been getting small group reading intervention. It was a K through 2 project, kindergarten through 2nd grade. And so a lot of the schools were still at a point where the children had to get to a point where they were failing before they would get intervention, right? So we're thinking more in a prevention kind of standpoint. And but 900 kids receiving reading intervention, it was just like thrilling, you know, that this team of people could make that happen. And Howard has, since that time, had several grants and helped the North Kansas City School District implement school-wide positive behavior support. I mean, it's a district-wide program now. It's in all their schools. So, I mean, that and then the CW Fit intervention, that started as part of that Reading and Behavior Center grant. We had a school in close to downtown Kansas City, and it was they had very challenging students, and they had 50% of the children were English language learners, and there just were severe behavior problems that went along with that. You know, they couldn't communicate very well, instruction made instruction more difficult. We knew we really need more than just the traditional kinds of PBS kinds of interventions. We needed more targeted interventions, so we started this teaching and management and point system kind of intervention, CW Fit, in a couple of those classrooms, and it really worked really well. So then it became, you know, a funded randomized trial, and then it became a second randomized trial, you know, in multiple sites across the country. Now Howard's implementing CW Fit in middle schools. So, and I think he's getting ready to try to secure funding for a randomized trial in middle schools. So it's, you know, starting with an intervention and just building it and growing it and securing partners who can see the effects of it. And it's been a great experience to be part of those.
It snowballs.
Yes, very much so, very much so. I know that the CW Fit is now on the What Works Clearinghouse website. You know, it's just listed as one of those evidence-based interventions, and I'm really proud that one of my colleagues called me up. She was at the IES data camp that they have every summer, and she said, they're talking about CW Fit. It's a model because they use single subject design and randomized trials. And it's like, right, yes, there we go. There we go. So
It's really cool to hear that when it's not intentionally, you know, supported with someone there, and you know that other people are talking about it outside of, you know, the circle of folks.
I didn't even know about that.
Yeah, that's so cool.
That's like an email from my colleague. They're talking about CW Fit. IES is bragging about you. It's like, good, great. Give us more money. We'll do more.
Exactly.
One group that, well, we were suggested to ask you about is the girls with Tammy Kravitz and Linda Garrison Kane.
The girls.
Yeah. Yeah, Howard suggested, learning about your relationship with them and how that developed. And he said that it was just like very close, core-knit, you know, tight-knit group of people. Right.
That was one of those teams of people in the early autism research and our peer network interventions. And I mentioned that Vance was how he recruited people to come to KU and recruited good people from around the country. Well, he established a rapport with the May Institute in Chatham. And now, I mean, actually the May Institute is up and down the East Coast. They have residential treatment centers and schools and collaborate with schools. And so there was this pipeline of graduate students coming from the May Institute, their residential treatment center. So when I started getting autism funding and Vance said, you know, we've got some more people who want to come out, I was like, bring them on, you know, we'll put them on our peer networks intervention grant. And so we did. And so Tammy Kravitz is one of those early people. Jessica Warrior is one of those early people. Linda Garrison Kane. Erin Dugan is one of those people. She's now an assistant superintendent in Olathe. So those early people were just a team of people. They came from the May Institute and they knew intervention. They knew how to teach and how to help with the behaviors of children with autism. So I was learning from them. They were learning from the Juniper people, from me, and so that was a great team of people. And they were instrumental in that longitudinal study, that 5-year study. So I still get together with those girls now and then. So we talk about Tammy Kravitz now is director of a Summit school in the Northland. So they're serving children and teens with autism who the school districts just cannot manage. And so their model is that they come to the Summit school, their achievement center, and they work on their instructional learning, they work on their behaviors, they teach them how to be in control of themselves, and then they transition them back to their school district. So they send staff back to the school district to help those children, to teach the staff how to help them succeed in the schools. So it's a great group of people, for sure.
And I can see the linkage back to here.
Yes, absolutely. And I think one thing that was really valuable for the folks that came from the May Institute is that they could see children with autism succeeding in the schools, because many of them were in the group homes and in the residential treatment centers. So that was good for them. And I mean, you know, some of those folks have gone back to other settings and I think help move more children out of residential treatment back into their community and their schools. So that's a good two-way street.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any, personal stories that you'd like to share? It's like anything funny. It's like Halloween parties. We've heard some good ones. Anything from your time that you'd like to share with us?
Well, I think the funniest Halloween party was Vance Hall showing up in a bathrobe. So that was like, oh my gosh. I know there's a picture of that floating around. And Charlie and Joe as the Blues Brothers. Oh my gosh. The Halloween parties are notorious. So they are fun. I should try to come back for a couple of those. But personal stories, I don't know. The research has always been the excitement for me, I think. There were a couple of touching moments for me in schools with children. I know one time we had set up a peer tutoring program for elementary school class in Missouri, and so the typical peers, the typically developing peers, they would come to tutor the little people with autism. And one day one of the tutors was sick, and so he didn't come. And so the other tutors came, and the little boy, it was his tutor, he just started crying and crying. It's just like, it was kind of one of those ha-ha moments, because we have this view of people with autism that they are aloof, that they don't want to be around people, that they don't care about their peers. And it's just like, I know from too many instances like that it's just that we haven't taught them. It's one of those things that they're not just going to learn naturally like other children learn. We have to teach them how much fun it is to be with other kids. And they can learn it, and they do. And it's so great to see those kinds of changes. That was a heartwarming story. I'll never forget that. Mm-hmm. And there was another little boy at that same school, and we did social skills group in the regular classroom. So we divide up the classroom into 5 or 6 groups, and then we'd include a little person with autism in each of those groups. And during baseline, one of the little boys with autism, he'd turn away from the kids, he'd be banging his fist, just like, don't touch me, I don't want to be here. And during intervention, he's playing in hula hoops, he's smiling. It was incredible, an incredible change. Completely nonverbal kid, but just the change in his affect, his demeanor, and wanting to be with those other kids. I mean,
And engaged.
It's just like, that's a moment where I'm crying, to see those changes. So it's our job.
It's making a difference.
Yes, absolutely. So, and those peers we interviewed 100 peers at the end of that longitudinal study. 90% of those kids said they liked being in the peer networks with kids with autism. They wanted to be in those groups again. So I tell people, these are the future voters. This is the future. These are the people that, this is how we want our children to grow up. So in an inclusive society, and we accept people who are different. So.
Or that you learn from a really early age that it's not scary or bad.
Right. Yes, very much so.
There's a lot of value there. This dovetails well. What would you tell the next generation of investigators and staff at Juniper?
Well, I can't say enough about the collaboration here and the mentorship. Even as a senior scientist, people were still mentoring me in ways, and mentoring people who knew people and reinforcing each other for our hard work. That kind of support, I think, is really, really important. And I think the other advice, I'm not really an advisor to people, but I know it's just, I'd encourage people to think big, think about the CW food intervention and where it's gone. Think big about what your passion is and what the interventions are that you're seeing successful and go for it, grow it and disseminate it and get the information out. I know, Charlie used to say to me, Deb, be assertive, get out there, you can do it. And that kind of encouragement, we need to keep giving that to each other, and we need to keep thinking big about our interventions.
That's cool. And then, is there anything that you think should be the focus of work at Juniper Gardens moving forward, or one of them anyway?
Right. Well, I think we should keep doing a lot of the good lines of research that we have going. I love the technology that people are developing, and not only for measuring intervention and observation systems, but for disseminating, using technology to disseminate, Autism on the Go, that's a good example. Websites for the interventions, that Autism Connections project. Getting the information out in a way that's user-friendly is really important, and technology has a lot to offer, social media, for us in that way. So I think that, and I think I've always wished that someone would move forward with math and science with those areas of intervention. And I think it's, you almost have to bring in someone who's passionate about that, who has some expertise in that area, but we've focused a lot on, quite a bit of our interventions have focused on literacy and early reading and behavioral interventions. And I think it would be nice to see that line of research here at Juniper. I think if we think about populations to autism spectrum disorders, behavior disorders, and again, it might take bringing in some new talent, but I think interventions for adolescents and young adults, I think there's a huge need. Think about people with behavioral and emotional kinds of problems and the mental health interventions. There are not very many good interventions. And intervention is, we just need to continue to do the intervention research in applied settings for people. We're not lacking for areas of research. So it just takes the talent and passionate people to do it.
Do you have anything else?
I don't think, is there anything that we didn't ask you about that you'd like to tell us about?
That covers everything I know.
Absolutely everything.
No,
That doesn't
but-
seem right.
Well, thank you, Deb.
Sure.
We really appreciate
It's
it.
been, I appreciate the opportunity to talk about some of these things.
That's cool. I know it's uncomfortable and weird
It
to
is.
talk in this setting and everything, but I think it's valuable
It is. I
to
understand the
record
value
it
of
and,
it. Yes.
and to make sure that future staff, future investigators have a chance, you know, who may not have had the opportunity to work with you
Mhm.
to learn from you.
Yeah.
So,
Great.
well, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks.